Hey, hey, hey! This lecture was designed to help you with Chapter 5, the Tissues chapter. And we know that all cells that work together to do one thing are called tissues, right? And so, for example, a group of skin cells or a group of cardiac cells that all function together would make up the heart tissue or skin tissue. The study of tissue is called histology. And in this PowerPoint, we're going to talk about the 4 types of tissues. Okay, so the first one this is all in the PowerPoint. But the first one, epithelial tissues, they are what covers organs. They're what I really think of when I think of tissues. They're the major ones. So think of them like coverings. Well, the connective tissue, they connect. They bind structures together, connecting them. They're for support. If you think about like fat, that's a connective tissue. Cartilage, that's a connective tissue. And this is actually the most abundant tissue in the whole body. Muscle tissues, you know what those are. Those allow for movement. They connect to skeleton. And then nervous tissues, that makes up your brain and spinal cord, that transmits impulses. Okay, so let's get started. Talking first about, there it is in a table. So if you want to look at the different examples, I always try to include the tables out of the book. Okay, so let's talk just about all cells, how they actually communicate. So you got 2 cells right beside each other. Well, the tight junctions, that is, if you look at the picture, that's these things over here. They remind me of glue dots. So they're sticking the cells together. They make it like a sheet-like. So membrane between cells, they merge and fuse. Okay, the desmosomes right here, they remind me of Velcro. So they, again, reinforce, holding the cells together. And then the gap junctions, the last one, is like a little tunnel, a passageway. So they could borrow, water from each other. They can pass chemicals or messages in between the gap junctions. So they can share that way, kind of like a little pipe. And there that is in the table too. Okay, epithelial tissues, we already said, these are the ones that cover organs and body surfaces. So highlight that. That's, their big idea is that they cover organs and body surfaces. They're in the cavity. So think back, the thoracic cavity, they're inside the cavity. They make up major glands. So think about like the thyroid gland. They don't have blood vessels, so they're actually getting their nutrients from down below, diffusion. They divide fast, so if you have a cut or a tear, the cells would fix with mitosis rapidly. And they protect, secrete, absorb, excrete for sensory reception. So they do all of those functions, and then one thing that's really interesting is this basement membrane. It's non-living on the very bottom. Okay, so hold on just a second. Let me show you a picture of this. If you look, let me see if I can find it. Okay, so if you look, the yellow cells are the epithelial cells, which we'll get to. But the purple, that's the basement membrane. And it's on all of them. So you'll see there it is, purple on the bottom, purple on the bottom. Okay, so back to that first slide about epithelial, and we've highlighted basement, non-living layer. Well, why it's important is that non-living layer, a lot of times cancer is caused, or cancer starts in that area. So maybe write that in. Cancer starts in that area. Cancer cells dissolve the basement membrane. That's normally where actually cancer starts. This is a clinical application on page 150 and 156 in your book. But the cancer then moves to the connective tissue and spreads. Okay, epithelial tissues are classified by their shape and how many layers they are. Okay, so if it's squamous, it's like flat, kind of like a bathroom tile. Flat, square. Cuboidal would be like almost like a dice shape. And then columnar would be like a column. So think about the words square, cube, and column, and that's easy to remember the shapes. Okay, if it's simple, that means it's one layer. If it's stratified, that means it's more than one layer. And then if it's pseudo-stratified, we'll get to some of those, but it means it looks like false. Pseudo means false. It looks like more than one layer, but in reality, it's only one layer. So pseudo-stratified is false layering. Okay, so there's your pictures: squamous, cuboidal, and columnar. Okay, so if you look back a slide, there's going to be simple squamous and simple cuboidal, and stratified squamous and stratified cuboidal. So just look at the word and you'll know the shape and structure already. Okay, so the first one we're going to talk about is simple squamous. Okay, simple. Think about it. One layer, thin. So it's not very thick. It's going to be thin. And so what is a thin tissue good for? Well, it's good for diffusion. It's good for molecules to be able to pass through easily. So instead of trying to memorize each slide, try to understand that the simple layer, well, substances can pass through those. Substances can pass through those because they are thin. Substances, do you remember diffusion, the movement of molecules from high concentration to low concentration without the use of energy? Well, okay, so here's your best example. You have these little, they're called alveoli or alveoli in your lungs. They look like grapes under a microscope. But what they really do, these little grape-like structures in your lungs, they absorb the oxygen, and then the red blood cell comes and picks up the oxygen and then takes the oxygen to the rest of the body. So in these little grape-like structures, alveoli, oxygen is moving in and out all the time, in and out, in and out. So they need to be thin. They're made up of simple squamous. Okay, and then also they line the blood vessels and the lymph vessels. Well, blood vessels are really thin so that fluid and white blood cells can leave the vessels, arteries, and veins all the time. And so when you think about the simple squamous, think, oh, that's where osmosis and diffusion happen. This is the most thin because the squamous are flat. So these are the most thin. Okay, and then the next one would be the simple cuboidal. Okay, with simple cuboidal, think about every time you see this word, simple cuboidal, I want you to think kidney tubules. They line ovaries. They're cube. They're single layer. Of course, it's still going to be, diffusion happening, secretion of the kidneys and absorption of the kidneys. And then also some ducts. That would be like, with ducts, like sweat glands, oil, things like that. Okay, simple column shapes. Elongated. Usually, see how the nuclei are these blue dots right there? Usually located at the bottom. So in a minute, I'm going to show you when they're not, and it's something different. Okay, they have, if you look right here, that gray thing, that's called a goblet cell. Goblet cells make mucus. So anytime you think of simple columnar, I want you to think of slimy. Where is slimy? Well, the uterus is slimy, so the baby can wiggle around, I guess. Okay, the stomach it's got a slimy layer, and that's why the acid in the stomach doesn't just like break down the organ, because it's acidic, but then there's that oil barrier so that the stomach doesn't break down itself, right? And then the intestines so that you can have so your food can slither through, right? So goblet, mucus. Okay, and then you want to know the location, the uterus, the stomach, and the intestines. But anytime the doctors look at a stool sample, the stool sample will have a lot of mucus, but then it'll also have lots of cuboidal columnar cells, right, that have come out, and that's normal. Okay. Pseudo-stratified columnar. Okay, I already told you that pseudo means false. False layering, that's what that word means. And so when the nuclei are at all different levels, Look at it, how the nuclei, look at this picture, how the nuclei are all at one level. It looks like one layer. Well, this picture, when the nuclei are at different levels, it looks like it could be different layers. So it is one layer, but it appears like more. So that's why it's false layered, pseudo-stratified. The cells vary in shape. Nuclei are different places. Okay, they often have these little bitty hairs on the top of them. Oh, man. There we go. These little bitty hairs at the top of them. They still have the goblet cells. Goblet, mucus, slimy. But where you want to know that these happen are in the respiratory, down the trachea and the bronchi and in the lungs. Okay, your lungs have a mucus in them that they're constantly shuffling around with their little cilia. So, and under the microscope, the cilia kind of just look blurry. If you'll look at the microscope picture on the right, it kind of looks like a little carpet, but just kind of blurry. But that's inside the respiratory system. Okay, the next one is many layers of flat cells. So now when you think about many layers, I want you to think this is thick. It's protection. This is going to be in areas that don't have a lot of diffusion and they need to be tough. Example would be the mouth, the vaginal tract, the epiglottis. That's the little door that closes so that food doesn't go down into the lungs. And so you do want to know the vagina because a pap smear is where a gynecologist would look into the vaginal tract and check for any abnormalities. And you need to do it, I think it's actually after 18 or 21 maybe. I know the slide says 18, but it may be 21 now. The pap smear, what they do is they look, and if it's a lot of the stratified squamous, that's okay, but they're looking for abnormal cells or abnormal pathogens, right? So bacteria or whatever. Now, some bacteria is normal there, but some is not. So they're looking for the abnormal ones. Okay, next is stratified cuboidal. So many layers, cube-like cells. This is going to be lots of protection. Lines the mammary glands, so the milk production glands, sweat glands, salivary glands, and the pancreas. Okay, stratified columnars. To me, it just looks like the top layer is columnar. So it's like the down deeper is cube-shaped, right? Look at the picture. But this lines the male urethra, that's where the urine comes out, and exocrine glands. Okay, transitional epithelial. This one is the neatest one because the transitional epithelium, it can change between stratified and simple. Look at the two pictures. And so this is like the urinary bladder is stretchy. And so when the urinary bladder is empty, not full of urine, it's stratified. And then as it fills up with urine, it stretches out and becomes simple. So you definitely want to know this one. Lines the urinary bladder. But it changes with filling up of the bladder. Okay, so now we're to connective tissues. The next type of tissues is connective tissues. And this is the most, right? We said this was fat. Look at the picture. This is going to be fat cells, bone cells, cartilage cells, blood cells. So there's a lot of different kinds of cells. And cells are further apart than epithelial, so they're not necessarily like connected and layered. They contain the matrix between cells. So they have lots of functions, bind structures, provide support, insulate, like fat would insulate. And then the white blood cells would protect against infection. Okay, so the first kind of connective tissue we'll talk about is fibroblast, and this is a fixed cell. That means it's not floating around in the blood. It's the star-shaped one on the top, and it secretes fibers into extracellular matrix, so extracellular liquid that's outside the cells. Okay, the macrophages, phage means eat, so they're big eaters. So they're cells that will engulf or take in a an infection like a bacteria, take it in and then destroy it. And so usually attached to fibers, but they can wander around in the cell. Wander around in the blood. They clear foreign particles like bacteria and things like that. And so that they help you with infection. Okay, mast cells, which is the third one, they release, you want to know, heparin and histamine. And heparin helps prevent blood clotting, and histamine, that's like inflammation. You've heard of an antihistamine to help with allergies. And so they also detect foreign materials, so pollen and such like that. But heparin, that's an anticoagulant that's given after surgery to prevent blood clots. So you've probably heard of that before. Okay, the three types of connective tissue fibers. So the fibroblast, the first example of connective tissue, so kind of think back to that one, most common, remember it was fixed. The fibroblasts make three kinds of fibers. So fibroblasts make three fibers. Collagen fibers, which are first. Collagen fibers are what's underneath in your skin to make your skin strong, and it fails you as you get a little bit older, and that's why you have wrinkles and cellulite. So thick white threads of collagen, it's structural. Okay, elastic. Think about elastic as stretchy. It can stretch and then go back. Your vocal cords and respiratory passageways. And the big thing you want to know about these is just where they are. And this is structure. And then the reticular fibers, they're thin, more delicate, and they're found in the spleen and liver. So all collagen, elastic, and reticular are little threads that are produced by fibroblast. Okay, adipose, that's going to be fat. Adipose is fat cells, fat tissues. And what they do is cushion and insulate. But they also store energy, and in fat is lots of energy, right? It's beneath the skin, behind the eyeballs, around the organs like the kidneys and heart. And then it's in between some muscles, depending on how much you have. And so fat, you'll notice under the microscope, it's big, it's going to be white with a little bit of pink outline. It kind of looks like a big marshmallow, so big and fat. And then this I just put in there just as a clinical application. Liposuction, that's where they suction out small amounts of fat from the body. And it can be used for someone who's overweight, like maybe even preparing for a heart surgery, or and they would remove the fat from areas where it accumulates, like the thighs or the stomach. But the problem is, when you take out that much tissue, it increases your chances of infection, and so that's why it says down here infection. So post-surgical complications that may develop include blood clots, emboli, infection, dehydration, so fluid depletion, things like that. Okay, cartilage. You know what cartilage is. It's what makes up your nose and ears, right? You have cartilage on the ends of long bones. So cartilage is a connective tissue. It helps with attachments and support, protection of underlying tissues. And really what it is, think about cartilage as being on the ends of your bones, your ears, your nose. Okay, one cartilage cell is called a chondrocyte. And chondrocytes have in them little spaces called lacuna. And so the spaces in the cartilage, I guess that's what makes them less dense. And the cartilage doesn't have blood supply, so it heals slowly if you tear cartilage. And there's three kinds that we're going to talk about: hyaline, elastic, and fibrocartilage. Okay, so here is hyaline cartilage, most common. Okay, you want to know for sure that hyaline cartilage is on the ends of your bones, nose, and embryonic skeleton. So make sure you know that. The hyaline cartilage Where's it at? It's on the ends of the bone. So think about your leg bones. They have cartilage on the ends of them. And so where the two bones attach, at the knee or at the hip or even at the ankle, where the bones attach, they're covered in cartilage. So it's just not bone rubbing to bone. It's got cartilage on it. You know that your nose is squishy, not like a bone. Your ears are the same way. But nose, the respiratory passageway, so the pipe leading down to the lungs, and then embryonic skeleton. We know that the skeleton is soft in babies, right? So the cartilage is replaced with bone later. Elastic is going to be the ear. Stretchy, flexible, ear and vocal cords. Ear and vocal cords. Okay, and then the third example of cartilage is fibrocartilage. Tough. So this one's, a little bit tougher. Shock absorber. That's pretty important. And it's in between your backbone. Intervertebral disc. And so your back is made up of a bunch of different bones. And we're going to learn all about bones. Don't you worry, I'm going to teach you everything. But in between those bones, there's a squishy disc. And sometimes you'll hear about people having a slipped disc. Things like that. Okay, you know what bone is. Bone, that is your skeleton. But this is the sixth type of connective tissue. So, and when you look at the bone under the microscope, it will look like this. And make sure that you're studying those pictures on Blackboard that are on the lab exam. Okay, so the bone to me looks like wood, like a tree that's been a cross-section of a tree. And so the skeleton and the middle ear, you have three bones in the middle of your ear, tiny bones. Solid, composed of, we know calcium is in bones, and salts. Support. Protects, think about your bones are protecting, your ribs are protecting your lungs, things like that. They are inside the bones. This is probably the coolest part. Inside the bones, that's where red blood cells are made. In the middle of the bone, like the bones are hollow. Okay, and then a bone cell is called an osteocyte. So make sure you know that. A bone cell is an osteocyte. Okay, blood is next. And we know what blood is, right? That's liquid. So fluid matrix. The fluid is plasma. And there's red blood cells, also called erythrocytes. Red blood cells are also called erythrocytes. White blood cells are also called leukocytes. L-E-U-K means white. E-R-Y-T-H-R means red. And then thrombocytes make up the platelets. So there's three things in the blood. And so when you look at this one under the microscope, you'll see, okay, this is the red blood cell. The pink circle. This big one is a white blood cell. And there's different white blood cells. They look different, but you don't need to know that for this class. And then the little ones, those are platelets or thrombocytes. So red blood cells, erythrocytes, white blood cells, leukocytes, and platelets are thrombocytes. The suffix C-Y-T-E-S just means cell. So erythrocyte means red cell. Leukocyte means white cell. Okay, we're on to muscle tissues. So we did epithelial, we did connective, and now we have to do muscle and nerve. And remember, during these videos, pause them, take a break, whatever. Rewind if you need to hear it again. Okay, muscle cells, you know what those are. They flex, they slide together and they get shorter, and they cause movement. Right, so I can lift my arm or flex my bicep. I can talk. I guess I talk a lot, huh? Okay, muscle cells are made up of fibers. They contract. So actually the little fibers inside the muscle cell, they slide together and make the muscle cell shorter. That's what really happens. And there's three types of muscle cell. There's skeletal, cardiac, and smooth. Okay, we already know from, I guess, chapter 1 that muscle cells attached to bones. You already know that. Okay. If the muscle cell it looks striped under the microscope, and I don't know if you can see this on your computer or phone, whatever you're watching this on, but it's actually like striped, and that is called striated. So it's actually, and you might can see it a little better over here, it's going up and down. Same way over here. And those blue dots, those are the nuclei. Okay, this is all skeletal, right? So I'm talking all about skeletal muscles. They're striated, they're voluntary, which means you choose to move them. I choose to pick up my arm. They have more than one nucleus, and they're long, skinny cells. So, attached to bone, they're striped. I control them, voluntary, and they have more than one nucleus. Okay, the smooth muscle cells, they're smooth. They're not striped. You know, that's just think about it. Don't try to memorize it. Try to understand it. If it's smooth, well, then it's not striped. It's striated means it has striations, or it is striped. They only have one nucleus. The skeletal muscle was multinucleated. These are in your digestive tract. Now, think about it. Do you control your digestion? No, you don't control digestion. And so these are in hollow organs like the stomach and the small intestines, large intestines. Okay, cardiac. You don't control your heart. Thank goodness, I'd forget and die. Cardiac is only in the heart. And do you see how they branch? Look how they, see how they kind of separate out and branch like that? So that's what it means by branching. But here's how you're going to know them on the test, under the microscope. They have intercalated discs. And so look right here at this piece right here. So right there's one. They have those, like a deeper striation. And so it's branched and it has intercalated disc. Okay, so let's review the muscles one more time. Okay, the first one was skeletal. It's striated. So skeletal and cardiac are striated. Okay, skeletal's voluntary, but cardiac and smooth are both involuntary. So make sure you can answer questions about those on the test. Okay, and then our last type of tissue is nervous tissue. Okay, so the nervous cells, you already know, are your brain and your spinal cord, right? Found in brain or spinal cord, and then you have nerves that go all the way out to your arms and legs, and we call those peripheral nerves. But one nerve cell, or the main nerve cell, is called a neuron. Man, I keep doing that, don't I? Okay, it's called, the nerve cell, like the brain and spinal cord cells, are called neurons. Now, there are cells around those neurons that help them, and they support it. And those are neurogelial cells. But the neurons are the main ones. Okay, when you look at the neuron under the microscope, it's going to look like, it looks crazy. It looks like, to me, I don't know, like a jellyfish or something, because you can see that the dark pink is the cell body, but then it's got all these long stringy things coming off of it. And so those are, we'll get into it at the end of the course, the parts of the neuron that are those stringy pieces. Okay, so just a clinical application that I always try to include when I think they're interesting. We know about organ donations, but what about tissue donations? And so we know that donor organs are in short supply. So if you're not an organ donor, go ahead and sign up for that. Make sure it's on your driver's license and your family members know, hey, I want to donate if I can. But tissue engineering is where they actually use your own tissue. So tissue engineering is showing promise for organ replacement. Okay, so they take your own tissues and stem cells and your own matrix, and they actually make the organ. And this would, because of it's yours, it has your surface proteins, there'd be no rejection. they've already done this for skin, like if there's like a bad burn patient, cartilage, bone, and blood vessels. So they haven't done organs, but they're working on that. And so the urinary bladders are being replaced. So they've working on urinary bladder tissue. The patient's bladder tissue contains progenitor, or the parent cells, right? The parent cells for smooth muscle, and the URO, that means urinary. So uroepithelium is just the main cells that can do mitosis and actually create the tissue. After the implant, the synthetic scaffold, the structural piece breaks down, and so is leaving the new bladder. All right, so I hope this was helpful. So this is Chapter 5, and you also want to look at the video I've made to help you for the lab exam. I hope this was helpful.